So I'm Jasun O'Crohor from Scatterwork, and in this webinar, we're talking about the project challenge number 7 out of 10, which we have: manage and communicate project risks. Managing risk is not just identifying threats, but it's also explaining them clearly and persuasively so that the people we interact with will actually buy in and support what needs to be done to reduce the risk. That is on the basis of a risk being a negative event, and I'll comment on that later because there are readers that speak of risk as also being positive. But in any case, we want to be not alarmist but transparent and build trust so that others will understand, and when we say there's a risk, they'll take us seriously. This webinar is one of our series of Breakthrough Project Managers. It's a cycle, there's about 10 topics in it, and we do them roughly monthly. So if you log into them, you can stay until we get back to the same place in the cycle. And what we do is we look for actionable tips for real project issues, and we focus on results in this. At Scatterwork, our consultants all have PMP, and they live in and work indeed in various continents. Managing and communicating project risks. So the first thing obviously is to say what a risk is, and it's something that could affect the project in future. And at the beginning, of course, of a project, we don't actually know what's coming. We can guess and we can draw up lists and so forth. We don't actually know. Now, some authorities rate risk as either positive or negative as you get in the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But we'll follow here the way most people that I meet on my travels think of risk as being negative. So that's the way we're going to present it here. So project risk management is a systematic way of driving down the risk, and it drops significantly at milestones, for example, end of phase in predictive, or at iteration demos in agile. And then another point is that if a risk occurs, it's not a risk anymore. It's not in future, it's now. So it becomes an issue or an impediment, as they say in agile world. And then another comment is that at the end of a project, there are no risks left because there's no future. So they drop to zero. So what we're trying to do is to drive down our project risk the whole way through the project. And most of our project actions are like that, but project risk management is that extra bit on top of that. Now, usually we have to assess our project risk in terms of probability and impact. And this is either based on statistics, if we have them, or maybe personal experience and judgment for a lot of, particularly for business issues. So there's different ways of going about it, whether it's agile or predictive. It's not fundamentally different, but the way agile looks for project risk far more frequently than the predictive method does, it means that there's some way of considering them before they cause an issue, and because of that, that minimizes rework. So for agile projects, we have a daily stand-up meeting, and its purpose is just to identify risks. And the wording is very often, who do you need to speak to, or something like that. But what you're really doing is you're saying, what are the risks? You don't solve them, you just find out what they are. And then independently of that, you find out what you need to do. It could be the same people, but it's actually a different meeting. And when we find out what needs to be done, we add this to the backlog. And then the product owner is the person who decides whether or not we do something about it. In predictive projects, it makes sense to think out in advance as many project risks and as we can identify, maybe using checklists and asking people and so forth. And risk can arise for all sorts of different reasons: technical, environmental, and so on, safety and business reasons. In principle, these separate categories should be managed differently. And if we try and minimize the effects of a risk, we talk about mitigation. We also talk about contingent project management, risk management. There's something that we do only if the risk actually occurs. So it doesn't cost anything except if it occurs. And then the resulting actions are added to the program. And if they require more effort or delays or whatever, then that has to be authorized by the Change Control Board. So we've had this already. Risk in future, issue is now. An issue may have been on the list of risks, but maybe it wasn't. And then the golden rule is, if you don't manage your risk, then you can run into issues very easily. What I'm presenting here is the more pedantic view, if you like, as in predictive, and then agile tends to be more dynamic and less analytic. So if we can visualize risk, that helps a lot. So what we can do is we can write the name of a risk on a post-it note and then put it on a chart like this, which shows probability against impact. And where both are high, where it's red on the drawing, then we would like our risk to be moved away from that corner. They're too damaging. And if the risks are placed on the yellow zone, that means that we judge them as being in the middle somehow, and we can maybe mitigate or some of those issues there. And then the third one is in the green area. If something lands in the green area, we're saying basically it's either low probability or low impact, or maybe both. And for that reason, we just live with it. And if it pops up, we'll do something about it. So to find out what all the risks are, the first thing we can do is identify categories of risk, because if we do that, we get better brainstorming than if I just said to you, what are all the risks? We wouldn't get as thorough a list as if I said, what are all the business risks, what are all the technical risks, and so forth. And then we can also consult with experienced people, stakeholders, people from previous projects, and so on, and document as many risks as possible. And then for each, assess the probability and impact if they did occur. And then this is the basis for sorting them out. So things that have a high probability or impact, we're more likely to spend effort and time fixing it. And then we either put the risk in to be avoided or mitigated or transferred or contingent. And transfer is a good one because then we're still able to do something, but we're maybe using other resources. So mitigate means reduce, and we'll implement those things anyway. And contingent, some people will talk about plan B, and we only activate the plan if risk occurs. So it doesn't begin to cost money unless it actually happens. Another thing that we do to manage risk is to keep a risk register. We want one place that has all of this sort of information on it, the description and an owner. In other words, somebody that monitors the risk. It's not their job to compensate for the risk. It's their job to monitor it and communicate with the project team as a whole. And of course, the status needs to be there. And if something has been retired or addressed, then it's not active anymore. And if a risk is not in the register, well, then it doesn't exist as far as the project is concerned. So another area where there are risks is silent projects, where people don't report problems. They report everything is green right up to the end, and then all of a sudden it goes red. And if you like, they've been covering themselves all the way through, and then nobody challenges it. And then at the end, all of a sudden, it becomes more difficult. Another thing I mentioned is that high-performing teams report more risks, not fewer. So that's good. I mean, it's not bad to have them reported, and then you can address them. So we try and get buy-in from the stakeholders by communicating the impact. So instead of saying, oh, we don't have enough engineers, you could say, with the current number of engineers, the project will run so many weeks late. So that's the impact rather than the generality. So now that we've sorted the risks, we've collected all these risk ideas and we've sorted them, and we've identified the ones that are more dangerous, shall we say, to the project. And then what we need to do is to decide what to do about it. And this is called risk responses. So we can avoid a risk, we can mitigate it, by reducing the probability or impact. We can pass the risk to somebody else to transfer it, get guarantees by insurance. And another one is subcontractors. We could take on experts in a particular area, and then they actually take the risk contractually, and they're probably better at it than we are ourselves, and set up contingency actions and reserves, and then accept and document the risk. That's rather important. Risk, it doesn't happen in our heads. If it did, then when something happens, then there's no solution. So we could ask these sort of questions. What type of risks apply to your project? What risks are there? What responses do you propose? Don't miss obvious risks, and so on. And you can build your contingency plans based on that. So some of the risks that show their head these days are on this page here. One of them is AI integration risks, over-reliance on AI, and sometimes they come up with what look like plausible outputs that are actually wrong. And the word for this common is hallucinations. Another problem is if we have team silos, where teams, don't really communicate with each other because they're in different places, or they have different bosses, or maybe they live on different floors of the same building, or they speak different languages, whatever the reason is. Yeah? And there was a lot of talk over the years about just in time, and a lot of effort, particularly with supply chains, that things are moving through and then they're sort of ready the minute you need them. And in recent times, that's taken a bit of a battering because that leads to very long supply chains. And of course, the longer they are, then if they pass through unstable regions of the world, well, then you have an issue there. So the key learnings I would suggest are these: risk versus issue mindset. Effective project management is managing what might happen today. That's risks, so that you're not forced to manage emergencies. In other words, issues tomorrow. And then whether we use Agile's rapid feedback loops or predictive structure matrices, the goal is the same. It's to prioritize by impact and ensure that you're not over investing in the wrong area. A risk register is only as good as the honesty of the team. Building in psychological safety is just as important here as it is in other parts of business. And by including psychological safety is just as important as the data itself. And if we want people to report bad news, then we have to support what I would say the psychological safety. And the fourth key learning that I would have is that stakeholders don't buy into technical risks, they buy into consequences. So always translate, for example, we have a problem into this will delay the launch by 4 weeks, and for example, to get the resources you need. So thanks very much for your participation here. You have there my email address, phone number, and so on, so you can communicate with me if you have anything you'd like to talk through, and I'd be very happy to talk to you. Thanks very much.